After weeks of strict restrictions brought about by the need to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus, Lagos State government is considering full reopening of critical sectors of its economy. Well, Governor Sanwo-Olu, coming out of a Security Council meeting on Sunday, noted that the reopening of these sectors will be dependent on the readiness of the different businesses operating in the state. Well, joining us to discuss this development in Lagos and related issues across the country is the Director General of the Lagos Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Good to have you join us, Muda.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good, wonderful. Would you say that the opening of the critical sectors of the economy here in Lagos State is well advised or practically based on economic considerations?
I think it's a very wise decision. That is the best thing to do at a time like this. It's bad enough that we have challenges in the external sector of this economy. We all know what the impact of the coronavirus has had on our oil price, the impact it has had on our reserves, the impact it has had on our revenue, and the impact it has had on our foreign exchange rates. So these are enough trouble already. And the only way we can get this economy to continue to move on is to ensure that we have enough room, enough space for the domestic economy to function. Because the lifeline of this economy now is not so much now in the external sector. It's now within the domestic economy. So the earlier we remove all the constraints, all the impediments to economic activities within the domestic economy, the better for everybody. Of course, the concerns about health, about containment of the COVID-19 and all of that, those concerns are very valid. But just as we are beginning to see around the world, we should have a way to manage both concurrently, because they are both equally important, they are mutually supporting and mutually reinforcing. I'm talking now about the economic security and the health security. I'm talking about life, I'm talking about livelihood. So it is important that you have a good strategy. So the step that the Lagos State government has taken is a very measured step. It's a very cautious step. The governor is talking about guidelines, and I'm aware that there has been a series of engagements with private sector stakeholders on how we can make these things very orderly so that we don't aggravate the risk of the spread of the virus.
Well, Doctor, thank you very much. I know that you've already mentioned a strategy, but I guess still on the topic of the exit strategy here in Lagos, what are we expecting it to look like? You also mentioned the need to acknowledge life and livelihood, and I think that has been a constant theme throughout the entire process of us fighting COVID-19 here in Nigeria, trying to continue on this balancing act of preserving lives while continuing to preserve livelihoods. How will Lagos State's exit strategy work towards continuing that balance?
Well, the first step is what the governor has announced. That is about sector-specific guidelines and the assessment of readiness for opening for each of the sectors of this economy. Now, some critical sectors have been under lockdown for the past 2 months. And these sectors are more or less like the life wire of the economy of Lagos State. I'm talking here about the hospitality sector, which has been under complete lockdown for 2 months. I'm talking about the entertainment industry under complete lockdown for 2 months. I'm talking about restaurants. Restaurants have been, partial lockdown, we say, because, okay, you can buy and take away, but it's not the same thing as having a restaurant environment. The road transportation has also been on kind of partial lockdown to the extent that we have barriers to interstate movements. Then, of course, the markets have also been on partial lockdown because you now alternate days and all of that, and you also constrict the timing. So all these sectors, if you take the economy of Lagos State, these sectors account for close to 90% of the economy of the state. And you need to get the economy to move on. So what the governor has said and what the governor is doing in conjunction with the stakeholders in the private sector is to ask the private sector stakeholders to come up with specific protocols on how to ensure that the containment strategies of the Lagos State government is not compromised. And I'm aware that many of the operators in these sectors have made proposals, very reasonable proposals. And if you do a risk assessment of this whole COVID-19 problem, and you look at it sector by sector, you will see that for some of these sectors that the governor or the state government is about to open up, the level of risk that they portend are not so high. Because most of these sectors are operating in a very structured space. They are former sector operators. I mean, take all the five-star hotels, all the top hotels. Easily they can manage the issue of the protocols of COVID-19 in terms of social distancing, physical distancing, in terms of hand washing, and all these other use of hand sanitizers and so on. To the extent that there is no large gatherings, to the extent that we are not having concerts or music shows or things like that, these things can be contained. So for many of these sectors, because of the nature of their structure, because they are also very well organized, they are coming up with structure that will make sure that we don't expose unduly citizens to the spread of this pandemic.
All right, I'll take you up on that, Dr. Good. You mentioned no concerts, because when you were talking about structure, I was thinking about entertainment, whether it's really that structured, in terms of managing space and all that. But you talked about to the extent there are no concerts and all that. The governor talks about what he calls supervised operations, following the registered to open initiative. What I am thinking, how much of an uphill task will this be for the government, to handle?
No, it's not going to be that difficult. The biggest challenge to this containment strategies is more in the informal sector, particularly around the markets and around public transportation. Then, of course, around religious areas. These are the areas that have the highest risk in terms of exposure. So that is why I was talking about having a very good and robust risk management and risk assessment framework, so that we evaluate the risk and we allow that risk assessment framework to guide the opening, which I believe that is the strategy that the government is adopting. For some of them, it is very easy for government to engage them. I mean, even if you go around many of the corporate environments in Lagos, many of them have even taken steps far beyond what the government has recommended, because everybody is so very conscious. In many offices now, only about 20% of their staff still come to work. Many of them still work from home. And for many offices, you can't go into any office without your face mask, without hand sanitizer being served on you and all of that. So because of the level of enlightenment and because of the formal structure of many of these institutions, it will not pose too much of a challenge, because the level of consciousness is also high. I mean, if you talk of literacy level of awareness, I mean, Lagos is one of the areas where the awareness and consciousness level is highest. Of course, I take the point, just as I said, in the informal sector area, in some highly densely populated areas, there are issues. But the sectors that the governor is talking about now are not sectors that can pose too much of a concern, because even those who are operators in the sectors are also very conscious of the risk that non-compliance could pose. So I think that there is room for proper synergy and collaboration between the stakeholders and the state government.
Okay. In terms of looking at what our future post-COVID-19 will look like here in Lagos, I wonder if you can shed some light on the report that was released by the Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in which you called for a need for more action. Was it from fiscal authorities? Could you clarify what it is you think fiscal authorities need to do to make this process better?
Well, it is important because as we speak now, many sectors are completely down. Many of them are on life support. And the only way you can get the society to continue to run is for you to have an economic life. If you don't have an economic life, this society cannot function. You are going to have all sorts of social problems. And you are going to have all manner of economic problems. So this is why we are saying that for whatever it takes, or for whatever sacrifice it will cost the government, we must give room for businesses to come back to life. There has been some argument as to whether the government has the resources and all of that. I believe that's a question of proper prioritization. We believe that if we give some room in terms of the tax environment, and there has been some, proposals from the tax authorities in terms of the filing, the timing of filing, and even tax concessions, tax waivers, that will help. Then we have talked about the facilities, the loan facilities that some of these operators in the private sector have taken from the banks. The central bank has, been gracious enough to give some concession in terms of moratorium, in terms of interest rate concession. That is fine. But we want the commercial banks to also take a key from that. Although I'm aware that on one-on-one, basis, there has been some engagement with the commercial banks. But a whole lot of businesses that are indebted to the commercial banks are still having issues. Getting the commercial banks to show that understanding that this is an unusual situation, you need to give some reprieve to operators in this sector, because some of them have not done any tangible business in the last 2 months. Even sectors that have been described as essential, that have been exempted, they can't function optimally, because the economy is an integrated system. If you let go one sector and the other sectors are not functioning, the economy can still not function. Because even for the essential products, you need people to buy them. If there is no income, no activities in other sectors, where will the demand, the purchasing power, where will it come from? So we should have an understanding that the economy is an integrated phenomenon. It's a holistic phenomenon. So we should get everything to function. So that is why it is important for the government to give as much incentives as it can give in the area of tax, in the area of tariffs, import duty. We have had engagement with the maritime authorities to give some concession in terms of waivers on demurrage on some cargoes at the ports, waivers on some demurrage with the shipping companies. The Shippers Council has been doing a great work supporting the private sector to engage some of these service providers at the maritime sector. So we need to have that kind of thing, because if the economy goes down, the whole system will go down. Government revenue will suffer. Job losses will escalate. And if you have that, right, you don't have a social...
Doctor, I'm so sorry, we have to interrupt you there. We have run out of time. Thank you so much for your insights. We will come back to you after this very short break, so please do stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Apologies, sir. Before we went on the break there, you hadn't finished landing on your point. I just wanted to give the floor over to you so you could continue on the point you were making before we went on break there. Go ahead.
Yes, the point I was making was the imperative of supporting the private sector to come back alive. Some of them are indebted to the commercial banks. For the past 2 months, nothing has happened. And some of the banks are reluctant to, demonstrate the kind of understanding that we'll expect to happen. Some of them complain about issues of the regulatory environment. They have that they are still grappling with issues of high cash reserve requirements, all sorts of payments to regulatory agencies, and all of that. So the point here is that between the central bank and the commercial banks, we expect to see more interaction, more collaboration, and more engagement with the private sector to see how we can create some room for the private sector, for investors to have a breathing space. Because it is the interest of everybody that those who are creating jobs in this economy, those who are creating wealth in this economy, are able to continue to do so.
Exactly.
That is the only way we can get this economy to continue to move on.
Exactly, Doctor.
So we expect the central bank to please prevail on the commercial banks to do a lot more. Because at a time like this, everybody has to make a sacrifice. Exactly. Everybody has to put something on the table to ensure that this economy moves forward.
One can agree with you more. I was actually wondering, why would, maybe maybe they have a reason, or maybe something nobody is telling anybody, why it should be given that at this point in time, just like all over the world, give and take, the commercial bank should be able to, some leeway for the business people, either moratorium or extended their debt or, whatever. But I'm wondering why it's so. Maybe you look at that, but add that to the fact that the governor says the plan to reopen the sectors should not be misinterpreted to mean full, what he calls a license for full opening. Doctor, what's your sense of the implication of the governor's statement?
Well, just to conclude on the earlier point, I must admit, in fairness to some of the banks, some of them have been engaging with some of their customers. But what we like to see is a system-wide pronouncement by the central bank, giving instructions to the bankers committee or to the banks that this is what you should do for businesses as a matter of policy, so that it's not just a discretionary thing, because not all customers of banks have the bargaining power to engage them. So we need to see a system-wide, regulation or policy from the central bank to ensure that for facilities that are with them within this period, all banks must give one form of concession or the other. That's of moratorium or interest rate concession, restructuring, refinancing, whatever it is. There has to be that policy framework. Now, coming back to the point about what the governor said, of course, it's not going to be a license for people to go back as if everything is now normal. Certainly, things are not normal. But the logic of what the governor is doing is that this situation is not a situation that it will go away tomorrow, next week, next month, or even till the end of the year. It's a situation we are going to live with for some time. So it makes a lot of sense to begin to come gradually to the reality of living with it and developing protocols of living with it. So the steps can only be gradual. So my understanding of what the governor has said is that this thing has to be gradual. He talked about registration. He talked about inspection of some premises. He talked about assessment of the readiness to open. All these are things that has to be put in place. And I imagine that there may even be some form of inspection or registration, an undertaking given by the key operators in the private sector to ensure that there will be strict compliance. And I can tell you, it is easier to enforce compliance in this space than in the general areas of public transportation or in the market areas and all of that. Even in the markets, it's amazing. Even there's a reasonable level of compliance, even in the public transportation space. But these are things that it's not going to be easy. But of course, all hands must be on deck to ensure that we achieve the right result and we don't allow the COVID-19 situation to degenerate or to escalate.
On the topic of introducing protocols that help us live with this new type of world we're in post-COVID-19, do you think that that will exacerbate already existing problems? One of the first and the strongest directives that we've had consistently told to us is that we have to observe some form of social or physical distance from the next person. And that, I'd imagine, would continue to be the case for the rest of the year at the very least. Speaking about social distancing or physical distancing, don't you think that that will result in more job cuts and, I guess, less business productivity? Like if you take a restaurant, for example, perhaps they wouldn't have as many staff as they did be in an enclosed space so that they are not flouting social distancing rules. And then in transport, like you just mentioned in your answer there, you've got buses and public transport observing social distancing, making sure that they don't have packed buses or whatever the case may be. But in terms of productivity, surely that's hurting it. If you have a bus that has the capability to hold 30 people on board, but it's only taking 15, yes, you're helping people stay safe. But I wonder if that is limiting the hallmark of Lagos being a commercial capital, being able to continue going about business as productively as possible. Do you see that type of commercial activity dying down as a result of these initiatives that we're going to have to adopt going forward?
Well, whatever it is, the situation will be much better than what we have now. What we have now is almost a complete shutdown, which is not good, because a whole lot of businesses depend on these sectors. The value chain is very wide and is very long. Take a typical maybe hospitality industry, for instance, or even the entertainment sector. You have the caterers, you have the musicians, you have the photography people, you have those who are in the rental business, you have the comedians, you have those who are in the business of decoration, providing lighting, and all sorts of people, those who are in charge of who bake cakes and all of that. We have hundreds of thousands. For instance, I got a report from the poultry, those who are in poultry business. Yes, poultry is exempted, they can carry on because they are in the food sector. But because the hospitality sector and the restaurants are not functioning optimally, they are having challenges selling their poultry products.
That's true.
They have problems with selling their eggs. Some of their eggs have gone bad because all these other sectors have been shut down. And because the economy is not functioning properly, a lot of people cannot even afford to buy eggs. So these things are interrelated. The thing is that this gradual opening will have a more positive impact on jobs. It will be much better than what we currently have. And you talk about social distancing and physical distancing. We also need to interrogate some of the policies of government along these lines. If you say you open a market, the objective is to ensure that there is physical distance. And you now narrow the period of operation from 9 to 3. Right. Is it not better to expand the number of hours so that you don't have a rush within the limited period that you have created? So that you don't have a situation where the very problem you are trying to solve, you are even escalating it.
It's actually creating, what you said now is quite interesting, Doctor, because it's creating some major problems for those of us who commute. I'm sure you're aware, you're noticing the kind of, in quotes, what I'm beginning to call satanic traffic jam that is on our roads. And I was told that everybody is running at the same time because the markets just open Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and so there's a lot of. All right, but before we begin to wind up and let you go, I don't know, but maybe I should take this one. The governor, quite unlike what you said and what Femi said, is not quite happy with the compliance level of yellow buses. Now, despite the assurances from their union, I'm wondering if he says the government won't use force, which is understandable. If this is the case, do you envisage this could be the same with these sectors? Even if it won't be what would you advise the government being proactive to forestall this kind of situation from arising?
Well, part of the areas where we have the highest risk in terms of compromising the containment strategy is in public transportation. Enforcement generally in those areas have always been very difficult, even under normal conditions. Yeah. So I think what should happen is to deepen engagement. Luckily, they have very strong unions in that space. So we need to just deepen the engagement with the unions to ensure enforcement, and we also need to strengthen enforcement. Because there are some segments of the society that no matter how much you preach to them about something, if you don't complement it with strong enforcement, you will not get results. So we should identify those and ensure that we complement all this engagement with strong enforcement. By the time we see on television that one or two of them have been sent to jail or something, people will begin to sit up. It's not going to be easy, but we need to make all those things happen. So it's a question of engagement and also effective enforcement of some of these things.
Absolutely, engagement and effective
enforcement.
I know you enjoyed that last answer. I know you
All right.
did.
Well, it's not about enjoying
Muda
it.
Yusuf, who is the Director General of the Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry, thank you very much for your time.